Good day, all, and welcome to another edition of Local Legislator Live at 11. We have a special treat this morning for you, so stand by for a plethora of good information. Local Legislator Live at 11 is a component of locallegislator.net, where our mission is to be the premier source of local election information in the United States and an advocate for the sustainability of local businesses nationwide. Our guest this morning is known as the emotionally naked speaker, writer, and mental health advocate, no other than Ann Morse Rogers. Good morning, Ann. How are you?
Good morning, Charles. I'm doing great. How about you?
Fantastic, fantastic. We are so happy that you are here today because you are also a renowned TEDx speaker who I had a chance to look at this weekend. I was deeply inspired by your message.
Well, thank you so much. I remember when the committee reached out to me because I couldn't apply for this particular TEDx event. And I thought, oh, well, they'll never pick me. They'll never know who I am. And then I got a call. And then they told me I had to do this message in 6 minutes. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's impossible. And then I kind of figuratively slapped myself in the face. I'm like, yeah, you can. You can do it. You can condense that message.
You made it happen indeed. Now, let me ask you, now talk about your mental health journey. When did that begin?
Well, it began when I started to notice that there were changes in my youngest son. And he had a sleep disorder and he had a diagnosis of ADHD. But we didn't have any particular mental health diagnosis in 2010. It was just a feeling I had that things weren't quite right. So I joined a small nonprofit called Beacon Tree that was dedicated to youth mental health. And I started speaking on that subject. I owned a company, but I started speaking on that subject to like Rotary clubs and anybody who would invite me. And it was really, really hard to get in on the subject of mental illness. But I guess my advocacy started then. And then around 2015, Charles's drug use started to escalate, and we were at a loss as to why that was, because we'd been very open on the topic of substance use. I had lost my first cousin's child who died from an overdose. And we talked a lot about that. And I remember Charles saying, I'll never, do drugs. I'll never cuss. And a year later, he was doing all those things he said he wasn't going to do. Looking back, I know that children that struggle with mental illness will often go to substances to numb their pain because that's their coping strategy. And guess what? They're also learning it from us. When we come home from a hard day and we, get in the easy chair or whatever, oh, I need a glass of wine to relax. We're telling our children, oh, this is a great way to relax, and not using or role modeling other coping strategies. So as drug use started to escalate, and we went through a number of things. We ended up having to have our son kidnapped out of his bed and taken to a wilderness program, which is not exactly step A. And then he went to a therapeutic boarding school. He came home, and in the year that he came home, he went back to those old coping strategies, which was drugs and alcohol. What I didn't know is that my son was struggling with thoughts of suicide. And those who suffer with mental illness and substance use disorder are 6 times more likely to die by suicide. No one had ever educated me on suicide. And we had seen at least 14 mental health professionals. And no one ever told me that statistic. So it went on my radar. And I never knew. And then we got the news that my son had killed himself when we were sitting in a police car in a parking lot. And my first thought was, how could I be such a crummy mother that my child would check out on me? But I didn't understand suicide, and it really would be a long time before I would, because it's not some personal thing, vendetta that someone has against you or a parent. That person is struggling with a very personal struggle with whatever at that moment. And it's kind of like this trance grips them. It's an irrational state of mind, can last anywhere from what's average is 20 minutes to 2 hours. And in that time, their brain is telling them they're worthless and that they're a burden. And it just takes a lot of compassion to sit with somebody in their pain at that time, if you were honored enough to be there when somebody is struggling. And next month is Suicide Prevention Month, so I hope people will start to listen and learn to sit with others in their pain without trying to fix the situation.
Now, let me ask you, Ann, when did you start the Emotionally Naked blog, and how did you take it viral?
So I started right after my son died by suicide. I would run into people and they would kind of look like they were going to be ill, a lot of them, not everyone. There were people who were very, very compassionate. And what I recognized is that my son struggled with suicide, but because I wasn't educated on a lot of things, I didn't recognize those signs. People who struggle with thoughts of suicide do want to tell. So I started this blog to start telling my emotionally naked story. But right before I launched that blog, I actually wrote a newspaper article, and that's what went viral. I didn't think anybody would ever read it. And then once it was published and I shared it online, I closed my laptop, I went down to the river because I was really struggling at that time. And then all of a sudden I had thousands and thousands of comments, and other people were reading their story and mine. So I just launched the blog right when that article went viral. So I had this audience, and they were reading the stuff about my grief and my son and how this felt, because they were struggling with the same thing. And I'd started the blog thinking, oh, I'm going to educate people, I'm going to help other people. And what I didn't really realize at the time is how much that was helping me heal, you know. And by giving back, I was finding emotional healing. I still hurt, but I was moving forward. Progress was happening, and I felt different. So I kept doing it.
Now, how did the blog evolve into a book? And who are these readers? You said there were thousands of people. Are there that many people going through these challenges and just not telling anyone?
Oh yeah, millions. Millions. Now, I don't have millions as followers. I have close to 5,000 who are on my subscriber list. And I've reached over 1 million people. So in the last 3 years, which is good news. So there are a lot of people going through this, millions. Somebody knows somebody who struggles with substance use disorder. Somebody knows someone who struggles with a mental illness. Some know both. Someone has lost, there are lots of people who've lost someone to suicide or overdose. So the book came about from, and it's called Diary of a Broken Mind. And it came out because people on my blog were saying, you've got to write a book. And they were relentless. And I mean, you know, I'd say, I can't write a book, I can't do it. And they're like, yeah, you can. You've written like thousands of pages on this blog, you can write a book. So I promised them I would write a book. And that's what I did, because I promised them, and they were holding me accountable. So, you know, I would write things, and then I would ask surveys like, should I do paperback? I mean, it was sort of crowdsourced at a certain point. So they told me paperback, so that's what it came out in, paperback, because that's what they were looking for. And we're working on the audiobook version now and got the Kindle out. And the people who read it, I'd say there are a lot of people who've lost a loved one to suicide who read it. A lot of loved ones who've lost someone to overdose or some other drug-related type of death. There are a lot of people who are in recovery from substance use disorder, mental illness, or both who read it. A lot of people who have a loved one who struggle still with thoughts of suicide or substance use disorder who read it. Teenagers and young adults, especially when I go to some of these high schools or colleges, they become more interested in reading more. I've included my son's rap lyrics in that book, and that is a particular interest to that audience. He was a creative genius and really did a good job of expressing his emotions. Now, I never saw any of these lyrics until after he died. And then I have an audience of researchers, licensed clinical social workers, and doctors. So I've heard a lot from that audience as well.
Mm. Now, talk about this 4 hour safe talk that you're involved in.
So I do a lot of speaking, and most of the time I'm telling my story. And what I recognized is that I needed a break from that, and I needed to feel like I was doing something really active in the community other than telling my story to kind of extend that. So I've told my story, people are interested, maybe they'll take a training class. So I teach something called Safe Talk, which is 4 hours of suicide prevention training. And I've done a ton of training. And when I first was training, what I was doing is trying to evaluate each of these programs and decide which one might be more valuable. And I like the Safe Talk training. Number one, it was 4 hours. It wasn't a whole day, it wasn't 2 days, but it gave suicide alertness for everyone. It had a lot of video and a lot of examples. So people went away with a basic understanding of suicide and were comfortable speaking about it. I just really liked that program. So I went up to Canada and I learned from one of the people that actually developed the program over a decade ago.
Now, I would imagine a 4 hour course as opposed to a full day or perhaps a weekend, you're packing a punch in that 4 hours. People are saying, wow, I get it. Now I know the signs. And most importantly, I know I have at least some knowledge more so than the average person of what to do if I see something. Because I'm going to tell you, I know personally of a person who was on the verge of committing suicide, but had no idea about these signs until a writing was found. It was a little diary. There was some excerpts in a diary. Don't ask me how they found it, but there was excerpts in the diary that were really dark that led them to have that conversation that before then they didn't know. They didn't know. So I would imagine that 4 hour safe talk is sharing stories like that to say, hey, listen, look for this stuff. And if you see it, take the necessary steps because most of us don't know what those necessary steps are. Now, as a speaker, do you talk to college kids? Is it high school? Is it corporations? I mean, who are you talking to? And as a part of that question, how did TEDx come to be? Did they reach out to you? Did they hear about you? How did that work?
So the first part of your question is who I speak to. And That is varied. So I get a lot of grief and loss groups, like grief and loss conferences, that'll reach out to me. I go to a lot of high schools and colleges, not nearly as many as I would like at this point, but I'm writing a book for that market. I'm under contract to do that. So I suspect that my future will include more high schools and colleges. I've been invited to medical conferences, pediatric academic societies, and a neurological summit, believe it or not. Doctors are prescribers, so that is an important place to be. I've been to summits and addiction summits, colleges of social work, and I have a little niche in funeral directors. So in what they call the death care industry, I've spoken to a lot of parents. So it still is very varied. And next month I go to Colorado to a nonprofit because this area of Colorado has a really high suicide rate. And so they have some federal money and grants to help them combat the high suicide rate in that area. And I'll be speaking outside, and they'll be following social distancing guidelines. So they'll be on picnic blankets outside, spaced 6 feet or 9 feet apart outside. So they figured out a way to still have their event and bring people together. And I haven't stood on a stage in a very long time. I
Yeah.
can tell you, I'm really looking forward to being there.
Yeah. Here. Now, your TED Talk. Your TED Talk was 6 minutes and 9 seconds long,
Yeah.
but you have thousands of views on that TED Talk. That shows you the power of packing a punch in a small package. Now, explain to some of our viewers out there, how did that work for you? Did TED reach out to you and say, "And we want you to be featured on this stage," and where did that happen? I know it was a TED Talk, but where did that happen?
It was in Richmond, Virginia, and it was Gray Street Women. So it was
Oh,
mostly women, but they looked for men to also deliver TEDx to this group, female related topics. And TEDx wants to balance their presentation. They don't want it to be all dark subjects. They want lighthearted, they want kind of funny. And I just didn't think I had a chance. And somebody put my name in the ring, my friend Jennifer Ianoff, which I am forever grateful for. And she kept fighting for me. And each person would have 12 minutes or more. But what happened was there were two of us that were selected, and they couldn't agree on which one of us to have. So what they did is they decided to have both Kim and myself. And so she got 6 minutes and I got 6 minutes. So that's kind of how that worked out. But I barely got my little foot in there, but I did. And I felt like it went really well. It was a transformational experience. It really was. But when I looked out at that big red dot, I got that jolt of being nervous. And
of
I
course.
said, "You are not going to be nervous. Or you can be nervous. You have 30 seconds to get over it. And then you're going to be excited about getting out there and sharing your message because this is what you wanted." So by the time they introduced my name, I couldn't wait to get out there. I couldn't wait to be with that audience. It was such a great audience. They were so much diversity, and it was not all women, but I'd say it was about 75%. And I just felt them with me the whole way. And that was a really powerful, great feeling. And, afterwards, and people hug you and they say thank you. And it was such a gift. And I'll be forever grateful for that opportunity.
Well, I tell you, and number one, Jennifer was one of those people that recommended you to me. And second of all, I will tell you, as a presentation coach, you knocked it out the park. So
Well,
I'll
thank
just let you
you.
know that was really well done in such a short period of time, and you just got it all in there, and it was emotional, and you hit all of the check marks. Check, check, check. Did it all. It was great. In fact, I listened to it twice. It was that inspiring.
And you know what? I'm going to take that as a quote. I'm
Go
stealing it
for it.
as a testimonial, Charles.
Well, you know, I do the same thing. So, hey, feel free. Now, talk about your free ebooks. You offer free ebooks as well?
I do. If you go to Emotionally Naked or amosrogers.com, you'll see a bunch of free ebooks. I love to write and I love to help. And, you know, you do have to sign up and be part of the tribe in order to get the ebooks. But I've got coping strategies for grief and loss. I have one about building resilience in our children. And it's like all of, you know, it's 20 pages. So we got a lot of people who are busy, but everybody has time to read 20 pages.
Mhm.
But I can tell you that doing that 20 pages and learning to do it takes a little bit longer. But they're very simple concepts. I have one called Grief Journey in a Jar, that if you know someone who's lost a child, you can make this jar and send it to them, and they can pull out a message on a daily basis. And it's just a lovely way to think of someone who is hurting, because I've been in that place where I've been struggling and I would have loved to have gotten something like this. So that's why I created it. It's more than a grief card, and it just shows a real level of love. I have one about noticing, you know, if your loved one is struggling with drugs, because sometimes those clues aren't obvious to us parents. I mean, some of the things we see, like, why are there so many water bottles that look all smoky in the trash? Well, that's smoking marijuana. And there's signs we just don't recognize, or signs. But we've noticed some behavior changes. We're wondering, could that be drug use? And this gives you, you know, all those clues that you see around the house. It starts to define it. And then I have one for funeral directors, and I'm creating one for bereavement providers as well. And the one for funeral directors is what to say to a family who's lost someone to suicide. Because my experience with the funeral home wasn't outstanding.
I can imagine. Now, do you also recommend your ebooks to, so let's say, caregivers and
Oh,
people like that?
absolutely. Yes.
Okay.
Social workers, caregivers.
Now that made me think. I have a friend in Colorado who used to live in Virginia. Now he's out in Colorado. I think he has a blog, and I know he has a Facebook page he just started for caregivers. I will make sure that he gets this information very quickly. Now, to our
Well,
viewers out
thank you
there,
so much.
you're welcome. To our viewers out there, if you like this interview and want more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and connect with us on Twitter and Instagram. And please like our Facebook page. And remember to leave us a comment, tag us, telling us who or what you would like to hear from in the future, and we will do our best to get that person on the air. Now, and in this COVID socially restricted environment, depression, addiction, and other mental health challenges have been escalated perhaps more than ever. Now, what advice would you give to those who may be suffering now in this pandemic environment?
I'd say don't slack off on your self-care. Find support. Find support. It's out there. It's not, some of it is now meeting face to face. The small groups, you know, they'll wear masks and all that good stuff. And then a lot of them are online. So it's actually more accessible now than it ever has been. But I think that is the number one thing, is to find that support and take a look at your coping strategies. Start listing, you know, those things that, like, a lot of people are eating a lot because they want to feel good. We all want to feel good. Or we're drinking a lot. I mean, you know, internet alcohol sales have gone up over 200%. And alcohol sales in Virginia have tripled during COVID. So clearly people are using alcohol to cope, and it's not the healthiest coping strategy. What else could you integrate into your life that is a healthier coping strategy? Exercise, meditation, learn something new. Maybe it's time to learn a new language.
Mhm. Oh,
So,
a lot of us have the time to do so, right? A lot
yeah,
of us have the
exactly.
time to do so. Now, could you share a personal story of one of your listeners or one of your clients whose life may have changed because of something you said or something that you inspired them to do or not to do?
Well, I will be honest, I've gotten thousands of messages like that.
That's why I
And
say only one.
yeah, I know, they never get old. But one of my favorites, and since you watched the TED Talk, I do a lot of articles specifically so they are ranked on Google. So people who are struggling, when they go to Google to say, for example, look up a way to die, will land on my blog. And so there's one page in particular that probably attracts about 4,000 people per month. And I inevitably get a comment that says, this blog post saved my life last night. And I've gotten that written in many different forms, but Charles, it never gets old. I mean, that giving back has helped me find emotional healing and continues to help me hold on to emotional
Yeah.
healing and recovery as well.
Wow. Now, Aaron, where can people go to find out more about you, your TED Talk, your books, or the other services you may provide?
AnnMossRogers.com or emotionallynaked.com. And if you Google Ann Moss Rogers, a lot of stuff comes up. I'm a stalker's dream on Google.
Well, you know what? I can attest to that because I did that, and I got a whole page of Aaron Ross, Aaron Moss Rogers stuff up there. I can tell you. Now, you know it's ironic that just over the weekend I happened to run across an article on some social media site that mentioned the top 10. Let me get this right. The top 10. This is LinkedIn news. The top 10 volunteering organizations of 2020, and amongst the top three, the American Red Cross was number one, Toastmasters International was number two, and
Wow.
number three, and number two was the Crisis Text Line. I had never heard of that before. But the crisis text line, I know when I reached out to you, you said, "Yeah, I mentioned that in all of my stuff." I mean, it's just so ironic that there's so much focus on that right now. I would imagine with the intentions of curbing it. So people become more aware. And if you are in that situation, because there's so much restrictions out here, people are living alone, there's no social interaction. And and I know people are suffering out there, and the crisis, and I didn't call it, but I'm assuming that crisis text line is a lifeline for those who may be hurting. And here's a number for you to call just to get a message. I don't know. You would know a lot more than that.
Well, you text help to 741-741, and it is for any age, but we have a lot of teens and young adults who use that crisis text line. And they can text because they found out they're pregnant. They can text
Mm,
because their parents are struggling with, both have substance use disorder. They're struggling with thoughts of suicide. They feel anxious. So it is a crisis text line in that moment of reach out, ask for help, instead of, it's a healthy coping strategy,
mm.
and they can also let that person know of what kind of local resources might be available to them. So I really advocate that teachers put up a poster in their classrooms, crisis text line, pregnant, suicidal, eating disorder, and, just advertise it, because kids really need to know it exists. And there's also, it is 741-741. And there's also one, and I don't have the number memorized, for LGBTQ youth, lesbian, uh, queer youth. And it is the Trevor text line, and that's a very good one as well.
It was called the Trevor text line.
Yes, and that is specifically, well, it is for LGBTQ students who are struggling with thoughts of suicide or coming out or any other issue related to the queer, bisexual, LGBTQ
Right.
group.
Wow, I never knew that. And see, and this is why we like to do these shows, because you gave our viewers and our listeners so much information that otherwise they may have not known. And I'm sure there's someone watching or listening, maybe not now, but in the near future, that is going to need that information that you put out there. For example, the uh, us as parents giving permission to our kids by coming home and relaxing with a drink in our hand. You're right. We're sending a nonverbal signal that this is how you cope with with a stressful day, and we're sending a signal to them that, hey, this is okay for me, and therefore it's okay for you. Very interesting stuff, and that's why, again, to our listeners out there, this is why we do what we do. If you know people who you think would be a good fit for this show, who are giving information, elected politicians, aspiring elected officials, business leaders, community leaders, people making a difference out there, nonprofits. We're not looking for the American Red Cross out there. No disrespect to the American Red Cross and some of the big ones, but we're looking for the small, local nonprofits that are in your neighborhoods doing big work. We want to know about them and we want others to know about them. So invite them on Local Legislator Live at 11, and we'll be more than happy to give you some airtime so people can find out more about you. Make sure you check in with us on Wednesday. We will have Andre St. George, he's an entrepreneur, a youth advocate, and along the lines of Ann Morse Rogers, he's not a crisis person, but he deals with youth and some of the troubles that they deal with. You want to make sure you tune into that on Wednesday. Remember to tell your colleagues, friends, and family about us. Again, check us out on all the social media platforms like our Facebook page. And just remember, at the end of the day, we're not global, we are local. Local Legislator Live at 11. And Morse Rogers, it has been indeed a pleasure talking to you and enlightening not only our listeners and our viewers, but me as well. So thank you so much, Ann. And listen, you enjoy yourself and keep up the good work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, and I appreciate your having me.
You're welcome. Take care, guys. Until Wednesday, we'll see you then.
Okay.